I remember when I was 10 years old, me, my parents, and my older sister moved to a quiet neighborhood. No trouble, no danger, or anything like that. That's what I thought about where we lived until I began encountering our neighbor. An older woman, probably in her 60s. I remember at that age, being absolutely terrified of that woman. My bedroom overlooked the front of the house. That's where I first saw her, on our driveway. It was like 11:30 at night, and I'd been asleep since about 9. But I woke up, confused by the sound of tapping on my window. It didn't take a genius to work out that it was loose stones. I'd done that myself at my best friend's house when I'd wanted his attention, but his mom had grounded him, so I couldn't see him. I remember getting out of bed, slowly and cautiously, thinking that whoever was outside was definitely not my best friend at that hour. I'd felt suspicious, but not afraid at that point, so opening the curtains to take a look hadn't seemed like such a struggle. When I peeped outside, that's when I saw the next-door neighbor. She was standing on the driveway, and she was waving up at me, smiling. That was it. That was all she had been doing. I'd only met her like 2 times when my mom had spoken to her briefly while taking me and my sister to school. I hadn't known what to do really, so I just waved back awkwardly before shutting the curtains and going back to bed. I wasn't going to pretend I thought it was normal, but I also didn't think anything bad was going to come out of it. I didn't mention it to my mom or dad. I kind of forgot about it the next day, until that night, the same time, around 11:30. I'd woke up to the stones against my window, more freaked out than the previous night now. I'd known it was going to be her again, and I was totally bewildered as to what she wanted with me, but I didn't ignore her. I went to my window and I looked out onto the drive. There she had been, waving at me like some robotic doll and smiling a lot more creepily than the night before. Scared wasn't the word. I hadn't been too concerned the night before, but I remember being really shaken after the second time. I stared at her for a long while, panicked. She just continued to wave at me and smile. The fact she was doing that in the middle of the night to a 10-year-old just wasn't normal. I pulled my curtains shut and I went to my sister's room. I figured I'd tell her before my parents. When I woke her up, she was annoyed, but she realized quickly how distressed I was and came to my room to see what I was blabbering about at nearly midnight. But when my sister looked out of my bedroom window and I waited, I was shocked when she turned to me and said in confusion that no one was outside. I looked as well, and she was right. There had been no one there. It ended with my sister telling me I just had a bad dream that seemed really real, and no matter how much I tried to convince her otherwise, it was to no avail. She didn't believe me. She'd retreated back to her room and I'd got back into bed, scared and wondering what that old woman was going to do next. Her odd behavior went on for 3 days. My sister's dismissive attitude had turned me off of the idea of informing my parents. I was thinking that they'd probably just think I was having bad dreams too. But when the 4th day came around, that's when I was shaken to the core. Again, at the same time of night, there the woman was in the driveway. I had no lights on in my room, and I literally peeped out of the curtain a fraction, so she might not know I was even looking at her. She was there, but that night, she'd lit candles and placed them around herself on the floor. I was seriously spooked. I was thinking what on earth was wrong with her, and what did she want from me? Then she pulled a flashlight out of her coat pocket, and she shined it up at my window, probably checking if I was actually there or not. I fell backwards onto the floor and I hurried back to my bed. I was only 10 at the time, and after my sister's reaction when I told her I didn't think I could tell my parents without them believing I was either dreaming or making the whole thing up. It got to 1 in the morning. I hadn't been able to go back to sleep due to fright, but that fear I was feeling only intensified even further when more tapping had started to sound on the window. But that time, I knew it hadn't been stones. It was too frequent, not stopping for a pause. I was consumed with panic when I'd realized it was a knuckle knocking gently on the glass. At that point, I didn't know what to do. I was terrified, but I guess some adrenaline had taken over too. I jumped out of bed and I went to the window. I clearly remember the pounding of my heart, but I yanked back those curtains anyway. That creepy woman was right in front of me. She had put a ladder against the wall and she had actually climbed up to my bedroom window at 1 in the morning to get attention. She looked angry, almost possessed with rage. I could see her mouthing words to me, and I'd known what she was saying. She was demanding that I do not, under any circumstances, tell my parents anything. She started insisting I open the window. If I knew what was good for me, I wouldn't hesitate any longer. That had been enough for me. I screamed, and I ran from my room and straight to my parents. They had already heard my cries and were getting out of bed as I went bounding into their bedroom and bombarded them with the story of everything that had been happening with the weird woman at night. They hurried to my room and to the window, but there was no one there. The ladder wasn't even there. She was gone like she had never even been there at all. I was that frightened and distressed that my parents didn't really have a choice when it came to believing me or not. They had to. I was explaining in too much detail for it to not be true. My sister had come hurrying into my room when she heard the shouting, and eventually she started to apologize for not believing me the first time. My dad went downstairs and outside to check around the property. The woman wasn't there, so he went to her house and started hammering hard on the front door, angry that she would do such things to a 10-year-old. It wasn't right. Imagine my horror when he'd come back to our house, while me, my mom, and my sister waited in the living area and told us that a young woman had opened the door, confused and quite irritated that he had woken her partner, and their new baby by banging so hard on the door and shouting in the middle of the night. The young woman had had no idea who my dad was talking about. My dad had no idea who the young woman was and why she was in that old lady's house. It soon resonated with all of us that that woman who had been in the garden of the house next door, smiling kindly at my mother some mornings and terrorizing me at night, didn't live in that house at all. No one in the neighborhood had any idea who my mom and dad were talking about when they knocked on doors and asked about her. The police were notified about the mysterious driveway creep, but nothing really came of it. I never saw that older lady again after that night, but it sure didn't mean I stopped thinking about her. I still wonder about her sometimes, who she was, what her intentions were she just strangely disappeared after that. 7 years have passed since that time, and sometimes I do find myself at night in my room, wondering if she might be on the other side of my window, or if she paid me any creepy visits after my 10-year-old self had been petrified that night. I guess I'll just never know.